How would you react if another passenger took the seat you purchased and the airline asked you to relocate? Imagine this scenario. You've just completed an exhausting week of business meetings, the type where your mobile device constantly rings. Your schedule is packed from dawn until dusk, and even your morning coffee seems to require its own caffeine boost. This described David Langston's week in Phoenix, Arizona. He was eager to disconnect completely. No phone calls, no electronic messages, just himself, a spot by the window, and several hours of quiet before reaching his home in Dallas. However, this journey wouldn't unfold as expected. David reached Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport ahead of schedule, which was his usual practice. He despised feeling rushed. He preferred moving at a leisurely pace, observing the terminal, taking in the conversations of families managing children, partners arguing about gate modifications, and professionals absorbed in their computers. Airports functioned as their own unique ecosystems. He had discovered years earlier that observing how individuals interacted in these transitional spaces revealed much about human nature. He pulled his leather luggage on wheels, verified his gate on the display, and walked toward the Delta Sky Lounge. Being a regular traveler and financially comfortable, he could enjoy such amenities. Though he didn't display his wealth ostentatiously, he avoided flashy timepieces or attention-grabbing attire. On this day, he wore a gray shirt, dark denim, and athletic shoes. Understated, yet comfortable. However, careful observation would reveal the quiet assurance in his movements. Within the lounge, David obtained coffee and positioned himself near the glass. He retrieved his mobile device, browsed the news, and chuckled upon seeing a particular headline, an article regarding an airline executive expressing regret for booking mishaps. He shook his head. "They're slow to learn," he whispered quietly. 10 minutes passed before his phone alerted him about boarding. He finished his remaining coffee, straightened his jacket, and headed to the gate. Boarding had recently commenced, and predictably, passengers crowded the lanes, despite their sections not being announced yet. He exhaled deeply, gripped his luggage handle more firmly, and surveyed the boarding area. That's when she caught his attention, a lady appearing to be in her mid-40s, with blonde hair styled to shoulder length, wearing pearl accessories, dressed in a cream-colored jacket. She possessed the appearance of someone accustomed to having her wishes fulfilled, self-assured, perhaps excessively so. She stood close to the premium class queue, looking at her phone, occasionally tapping her foot with impatience. David paid little attention initially, assuming she was simply another eager passenger. When his boarding group was announced, David stepped forward, presented his phone to the gate representative, and was permitted through. He traversed the boarding bridge calmly, thankful to be moments away from settling in. His premium seat, to a by the window, awaited him. That seat represented more than mere fabric to him. It symbolized achievement earned through effort. Extended work hours, late evenings, personal sacrifices. He had established his technology business from nothing, weathered doubt, overcome obstacles, and now that seat represented his small sanctuary of tranquility. However, tranquility, as he would soon discover, wasn't available today. When David entered the aircraft and looked toward his row, seat 2A was already taken, and not by mistake. Before we explore that tense encounter, let's remain with David briefly longer because the actual turbulence was just beginning. David stopped in the walkway, blinking once, as though his vision had deceived him. Row 2, window position, his designated spot, but seated there, already comfortable with her purse positioned neatly beside her and a glass of bubbly water in hand, was the identical woman he'd observed at the gate. She glanced up, offered him a courteous half-smile, then resumed scrolling. On her device, no uncertainty, no indication of recognizing she occupied the incorrect location. David cleared his throat. "Pardon me," he said peacefully. "I believe you may be in my assigned seat. That's 2A, correct?" The woman looked at him once more, her smile becoming strained. "I'm sitting in 2A," she responded with certainty, as if the discussion was concluded. David tilted his head slightly, maintaining an even tone. "I don't believe that's accurate. My ticket indicates 2A. You should verify yours." For a brief moment, she paused, but then her posture became rigid. She displayed her phone showing the digital boarding pass. "It clearly shows 2A here," she declared loudly enough for the gentleman in the aisle behind David to look up with surprise. David leaned closer. He wished to avoid creating a disturbance. He examined the screen quickly, but it didn't display 2A. It clearly indicated 3C, middle seat, an entirely different row. He took a deep breath. "That shows 3C, not 2A. The woman frowned as if she hadn't understood him properly. Then she laughed softly, the type of laughter used when someone believes the other person is being absurd. No, that's incorrect. I consistently fly in 2 amperes. David blinked again. Consistently. Seats aren't permanently assigned to individuals. They vary with each flight. She folded her arms, phone still in her grasp. "Listen, perhaps they made an error when printing the ticket, but this is where I sit." By this time, several premium passengers were observing. their attention shifting between David and the woman. The atmosphere in the cabin became heavier, as if everyone was holding their breath. David maintained his composure. He had learned early that raising his voice often disadvantaged him, regardless of justification. Measured words carried greater impact. Ma'am, I prefer not to dispute with you, but the boarding pass clearly indicates 3C. My ticket shows to AI would be grateful if you could relocate so we can all get situated. Her lips formed a tight line. Well, perhaps you should occupy 3C then. Issue resolved. That was the breaking point. A murmur spread through the cabin. Someone whispered, "That's not the proper procedure." Another person shook their head in amazement. David straightened, his grip tightening on his bag strap. He recalled all the boardroom instances where he had to prove his belonging. When people assumed he was someone's aide rather than the company founder, when respect had to be earned from those who freely gave it to others. This felt like another such moment, seemingly minor, but carrying the burden of countless previous slights. He leaned forward slightly, his voice resolute but not elevated. With complete respect, I purchased 2A. That's my designated seat. I will not relocate. Before she could respond, a flight attendant appeared, smiling too enthusiastically, the kind of expression used to pacify tense travelers. Is there an issue? Here, David exhaled slowly. Yes, this lady is occupying my seat. The attendant looked between them, then at the boarding passes, and for a moment, David noticed it. The hesitation, the brief uncertainty in her eyes, the unspoken assessment about whom she believed first. Instead of resolving it promptly, the attendant's following words only worsened the situation, and the tension in the cabin increased another level. The flight attendant, a woman in her early 30s with a name badge reading Kelly, initially turned toward Caroline. "Ma'am, may I examine your boarding pass again?" Caroline handed over her phone with a sigh, as though the entire situation was beneath her dignity. "I already explained to him," she said, gesturing toward David. "This is where I belong." Kelly examined the pass. Her smile remained constant, but there was a pause before speaking. "All right, it appears your seat is 3C, not 2A. David nodded. Finally, some resolution, but Caroline remained unmoved. She angled her head and gave Kelly a look, suggesting, "You know I'm correct, don't you? That must be an error. I always sit toward the front. I reserved premium class weeks." In advance, Kelly maintained her professional demeanor. "Yes, ma'am. 3C is also in premium class, but 2A is designated for this gentleman." She turned to David. "Sir, may I also see your boarding pass?" David handed it over without delay. Kelly reviewed it, then returned it with a polite nod. "Yes, 2A is accurate. Case resolved." Or it should have been. Caroline's smile disappeared, replaced by a sharp expression. "I don't comprehend. Why must I move? I'm already settled here. Can't he simply take 3C? It's not significant." David felt a familiar pressure rising in his chest, the kind that came from years of having to validate his presence in spaces he'd worked hard to access. He glanced at Kelly, expecting her to correct the situation. Instead of insisting, Caroline, "Move." Kelly hesitated. "Well," she began gently, "perhaps, just for today, you could accept 3C, sir. This way, we can maintain smooth boarding and prevent any delays." The words hit hard. Several passengers shifted in their seats, eyes widening. Everyone understood what had just occurred. Kelly was choosing convenience over justice, and Caroline's entitled smile returned immediately. David stared at Kelly, then back at Caroline, then at the passengers who were now watching intently. He took a breath, steady and deliberate. "So, let me understand this correctly," he said slowly, his voice quiet but carrying. "She occupies my seat. You confirm it belongs to me. And instead of requesting her to move, you want me to depart." Kelly's smile wavered. "I'm simply trying to make this simpler for everyone." Caroline interrupted, feeling empowered. "Precisely. Why create difficulty? It's merely a seat. You'll still be in premium class." David angled his head. "It's not merely a seat. It's about dignity. I followed the regulations. I paid for this location, and now you're telling me it's irrelevant." The silence in the cabin deepened. A man across the aisle muttered, "He's correct." A woman in the back added, "This isn't just..." But Caroline crossed her arms, becoming more entrenched. "I've been a faithful Delta patron for 15 years. I don't believe one small error should spoil my flight." David released a dry laugh. "Interesting. I've also been a loyal customer. Additionally, I happen to hold shares in this airline, so perhaps I have equal right to expect respect." That caught Caroline's attention. Her eyes flickered, but she still didn't relocate. "Oh please. Everyone claims to be an investor nowadays." Kelly appeared trapped, caught between trying to satisfy one passenger without disturbing the other. But her indecision only worsened things. More voices in the cabin joined now, some supporting David, others whispering to their neighbors about entitled behavior. David's patience was wearing thin. He leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but firm, the type of tone that made people stop and pay attention. I'm not relocating. I've encountered this type of situation before, always being asked to step aside, to accept the inferior option, to make it convenient for everyone else, while my dignity gets compromised. Not today, Carolyn scoffed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Now, she glanced at Kelly, expecting support. Kelly opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the captain's voice resonated over the intercom, announcing final boarding and reminding everyone to take their seats promptly. The timing was both perfect and terrible, because the cabin wasn't settling, it was simmering. But followed was the moment David decided this wouldn't be just another slight he allowed to pass. It would be the turning point. Kelly, still standing awkwardly in the aisle, touched her earpiece and whispered something to another crew member at the front. Within seconds, a second attendant arrived, a tall man with precisely trimmed hair and the kind of smile that seemed more practiced than sincere. His name tag read Mark. "What's happening here?" he asked, lowering his voice, but still audible enough for nearby passengers to hear. Kelly gestured between David and Caroline. "There's a seating confusion. She's in 2A, but it actually belongs to him." Mark glanced at David, then at Caroline, then back at David again. His smile tightened. "Sir, if you wouldn't mind accepting 3C4 today, we can get this aircraft moving. We really don't want to delay departure." David blinked. "You're asking me to relocate even after verifying both tickets?" Mark kept his tone steady. "It's just one row back. You'll still receive the same service." Caroline leaned back in, her arms crossed as if she had already prevailed. "Exactly. He's making this more difficult than necessary." David's jaw tensed. He inhaled through his nose, forcing calm into his voice. "Do you hear yourselves? You're both telling me to surrender my seat, the seat I purchased, because she refuses to move. That's not solving the problem. That's rewarding it." A ripple went through the cabin again. Whispers. A few passengers shook their heads. One man near the bulkhead muttered, "That's wrong." Mark raised his palm slightly. "Sir, please. We're just trying to de-escalate the situation. If you could assist us." David interrupted him. "No, I'm not assisting by allowing someone else to disrespect me. I've assisted enough in my life by remaining quiet when I shouldn't have. Not today." Kelly shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Langston, if you'll just—" David interrupted again, louder this time so the entire premium cabin could hear. "No, you keep asking me to compromise, but you haven't once asked her to accept responsibility. Why?" Silence. Mark glanced at Kelly. Kelly looked at Caroline. Caroline rolled her eyes dramatically as though she were the victim of an unreasonable man creating a scene. David turned slightly, addressing the passengers now. "You all witness what's happening, correct? She occupies my seat. They confirm it belongs to me, but instead of asking her to move, they want me to back down. How many times has this occurred? How many times do people like me get told to remain quiet, keep it peaceful, don't disturb the status quo?" The cabin grew still. A woman 2 rows back called out, "He's correct. This is absurd." Another added, "Give the man his seat." Caroline flushed, but she didn't move. "I'm not the villain here," she snapped. "I booked premium class like everyone else. Perhaps there's a glitch in their system." David shook his head slowly. "No glitch, just entitlement." Mark exhaled, trying to maintain his smile, but it was slipping. "Sir, please lower your voice." David looked him directly in the eye. "No, I've lowered my voice too many times." For a long moment, no one moved. The engines hummed softly outside. Boarding announcements continued faintly from the terminal, but inside that cabin, everything depended on what happened next. Kelly leaned toward Mark, whispering, "We need to contact the captain." David heard her. He set his carry-on gently in the overhead compartment, removed his jacket, and took a seat right in 2A. Caroline gasped, indignant. "You can't just—" David raised a hand. "Watch me." But this wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about what David chose to do next and how one decision would transform the entire flight. The atmosphere in premium class was tense. Caroline's voice cut through it like a blade. "This is unacceptable. He just sat down in my seat. Are you going to allow him to get away with that?" Mark's jaw tightened. He crouched slightly, speaking to David as though coaxing a child. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, we may have to involve the captain." David leaned back into his seat. His tone was calm, but there was steel in it. "Then, do what you need to do. I'm not moving." Passengers held their breath. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, invested in every word. Caroline, flustered, grabbed her phone as if preparing to document the entire incident. David turned his head toward her. "Go ahead, record it. Let's show everyone how this airline treats its paying customers." Caroline's eyes narrowed. "You're being aggressive." David laughed softly, not from amusement but disbelief. "Aggressive? For requesting to sit in the seat I purchased. That's what we call reversing the narrative. You take what's mine, then call me aggressive for defending my position." Kelly looked uneasy. She whispered again to Mark. He nodded, then walked briskly toward the cockpit. David knew what was happening. They were about to escalate it further, but that didn't concern him. In fact, he welcomed it. He'd reached his breaking point long before boarding this flight. Countless meetings, where his ideas were appropriated. Countless interactions where strangers assumed he couldn't possibly be the person in charge. Countless subtle slights brushed off his humor. And now, this. Enough. The captain emerged moments later, tall with graying hair and an air of authority. That silenced the whispers in the cabin. His name tag read Captain Reynolds. He approached slowly, scanning the scene. What appears to be the problem? Mark jumped in quickly. Sir, we have a seating disagreement. The gentleman is refusing to accept 3C. The lady insists she's in 2A. The captain's eyes moved to David, then to Carolyn, then to Kelly. He crossed his arms. Boarding passes. Both David and Carolyn handed theirs over. The captain studied them carefully. Then he looked up. Seat 2A belongs to Mr. Langston. David gave a small nod. Finally, someone had spoken the obvious truth, but Caroline wasn't finished. This is absurd. I always sit here. He could just move one row back. Why can't he cooperate? Captain Reynolds handed the passes back, his voice firm. Because it's not his responsibility to fix your error. It's yours to move. Gasps and murmurs of approval rippled through the cabin. David felt a flicker of relief, but it didn't last because Carolyn leaned forward, lowering her voice as though she were confiding in the captain. Are you really going to let him cause a scene? Consider the other passengers. We'll be delayed. David caught every word. His chest tightened again, but not from anger this time, from clarity. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about one flight attendant's hesitation. It was about a system that always asked him to compromise, him to move aside, him to diminish for the sake of everyone else's comfort. He stood up slowly, drawing every eye in the cabin. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of years of silence. You know what? If this aircraft can't depart on time because people refuse to acknowledge something as simple as the truth, then it won't depart at all. Not until this is handled properly. The captain frowned. Sir David cut in. I'm not requesting. I'm informing you, you're not taking off until the people in charge of this airline address this, because I'm not just a passenger. I'm one of your investors, and I'm tired of being treated like I don't belong in spaces I've earned. The words landed heavily. Passengers whispered louder now. Phones raised, cameras recording. Caroline's face went pale. Kelly's smile had vanished completely. Even Captain Reynolds looked caught between protocol and shock. David lowered himself back into 2A, calm as ever. So go ahead, contact whoever you need to contact. But this flight isn't departing until it's handled the right way. But with David drawing that line, the pressure in the cabin only built higher, and now the entire flight was caught in the crossfire. The premium class cabin buzzed now, not with idle conversation, but with the sharp energy of conflict. Phones were out, screens glowing as passengers started recording. Whatever happened here wasn't staying in the cabin. It was about to exist online. Forever. A man across the aisle wearing a navy blazer and glasses spoke up. He's correct. That's his seat. Why are we even discussing this? A woman further back added, this wouldn't even be a conversation if the situations were reversed. Carolyn turned toward them, eyes wide. Excuse me, are you suggesting something about me? The woman didn't flinch. I'm stating the truth as written on that boarding pass and everyone can see it. You're the one prolonging this. Caroline's cheeks flushed. She clutched her phone tighter. This is harassment. He's making a spectacle out of nothing. David spoke, his tone even. Nothing? You're sitting in the seat I purchased. You refuse to move. Then the staff asked me to give up what's mine to maintain peace. That's not nothing. That's the same pattern I've seen my entire life. His words hung heavy in the air. Some nodded. Some whispered to their neighbors. Captain Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Langston, I understand your frustration, but David raised a hand, cutting him off. With respect, Captain, don't tell me you understand. If you understood, we wouldn't be here right now. The silence that followed was sharp, only broken, when a younger passenger in economy leaned forward, voice carrying from behind the curtain. Hey, give him his seat already. We're all trying to get home. Laughter and murmurs rippled through economy, but premium class stayed tense. Carolyn straightened her blazer and looked around, realizing she was losing sympathy fast. Kelly tried, again, her voice softer now. Mr. Langston, please, we're just trying to get this flight underway. David turned his gaze on her, and I'm trying to make sure it's done right. If I let this go, what message does it send? That money can buy respect. For some, but others have to beg for it. That rules bend for convenience, but not for fairness. More heads nodded. A man near the galley muttered, he's got a point. Carolyn scoffed. This is ridiculous. You're acting like some kind of hero over a chair. David looked at her steadily. No, I'm acting like someone who's tired of being told his comfort matters less than someone else's convenience. And if you think it's just about a chair, then you haven't been listening. Passengers exchanged glances. The tide had shifted. He wasn't just another annoyed traveler now. He was a man forcing everyone on that plane to confront something bigger. The captain sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He knew this wasn't going away quietly. "All right, I'm contacting operations," he muttered, disappearing back into the cockpit. Caroline slumped in her seat, refusing to move, her pride holding her hostage. David leaned back, calm but unyielding. He'd drawn his line, and he wasn't moving it. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The cabin door remained open. Boarding was complete, but the plane wasn't pushing back. A murmur ran through the passengers as the delay stretched on. Some grumbled about missing connections. Others whispered that this was history in the making. A few cheered David quietly like teammates supporting a captain. Finally, the intercom crackled. Captain Reynolds's voice echoed overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a delay. Please remain seated. We'll update you shortly." Gasps filled the cabin. David's eyes stayed forward, steady. He had done exactly what he said grounded the flight, but the real showdown was still to come because airline management wasn't about to let this play out without stepping in. The cabin door swung open again, and two new figures stepped inside. They weren't flight attendants. They weren't pilots. They were from the airline's ground operations management. One was a woman in a navy pantsuit with a badge clipped to her pocket. The other, a man with a tablet tucked under his arm, eyes sharp and already scanning the situation. The woman spoke first. "Good evening. I'm Angela Ruiz, operations manager for Delta, here in Phoenix. We've been made aware of a dispute involving seat assignments. We're here to resolve this quickly." Caroline perked up, straightening as though salvation had arrived. "Finally, thank you. This man has been refusing to move. He's holding up the whole plane." Angela didn't respond right away. She held out her hand. "Boarding passes, please." David handed his over without hesitation. Caroline, a beat slower, did the same. Angela compared them, then raised her eyes. "Seat 2A belongs to Mr. Langston. Seat 3C belongs to Miss Whitmore." The cabin exhaled. Passengers murmured again. This time louder. Some clapped softly. Caroline's face flushed red. Still, she wasn't giving in. "That can't be right. I booked this seat. There has to be a mistake in your system." Angela's tone sharpened. "The system is not mistaken. Mr. Langston's ticket is valid." "You are in the wrong seat," Caroline sputtered, her words tumbling. "But I've flown this route before. I always sit here. I shouldn't have to move." Angela folded her arms. "Miss Whitmore, you will need to move to your assigned seat." Now Caroline froze. Her pride battled with reality, but the weight of dozens of eyes burning into her back was undeniable. David watched her silently, not gloating, just steady. The man with the tablet finally spoke. "For the record, Mr. Langston is also a shareholder. In this airline, his account is flagged as high value. So, not only was he disrespected, but this situation could have been avoided if staff had handled it properly." Kelly's face went pale. Mark looked down at the floor. Angela continued, voice carrying authority. "This delay has cost the airline thousands already. This is unacceptable. Miss Whitmore, move to your assigned seat immediately, or we will remove you from the flight." A wave of murmurs swept through the cabin. Phones recorded every word. Caroline's face crumpled between rage and humiliation. She clutched her bag, muttering under her breath as she finally stood and shuffled back to row 3. Passengers applauded softly. A few clapped louder, turning the moment into a quiet victory. David didn't smile. He didn't clap. He simply adjusted his jacket, sat comfortably in 2A, and looked out the window. Angela turned to him. "Mr. Langston, on behalf of Delta, we deeply apologize. This should never have happened." David met her eyes. "You're right. It shouldn't have, but it did. And I want to make sure your people learn something from it." Angela nodded firmly. "They will." She shot a look at Kelly and Mark, who both shifted uncomfortably. With that, Angela and the man with the tablet exited the plane. The cabin door closed. The engines revved, passengers settled, buzzing with the story they'd all carry long after. Land in, but as the plane finally prepared to take off, the lesson of that night wasn't about seats or delays. It was about what happens when one man refuses to shrink in the face of disrespect. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane pushed back from the gate. The tension that had filled the air for nearly half an hour slowly gave way to a tired but buzzing energy. People whispered, some still shaking their heads at what they had just witnessed. Others, phones in hand, tapped furiously, no doubt uploading clips to social media before the plane even left the ground. David sat quietly in Tua, gazing out the window as Phoenix disappeared beneath him. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. But there was a calmness inside him, a steadiness he hadn't felt in a long time. He hadn't just claimed a seat. He had claimed his dignity in front of strangers who now couldn't unsee the truth. Carolyn, 3 feet behind him in 3C, stayed silent. The earlier bravado had drained from her face. Every so often, she shifted in her seat, but she never spoke another word. She didn't have to. The lesson wasn't for her alone. It was for everyone who had watched the way a simple situation spiraled. because people were too willing to excuse the wrong person. Hours later, as the plane landed in Dallas, David gathered his things calmly. Passengers stopped him as he walked down the aisle. "Good for you, man," one said, patting his shoulder. "You spoke for a lot of us tonight," another added. David nodded politely, offering only a quiet, "Thank you." He didn't need applause. He needed change. Outside the terminal, he pulled out his phone and drafted an email not to friends, not to family, but directly to the board of directors of the airline where his voice carried weight. He wasn't asking for an apology. He was demanding accountability, training, structural changes, because if it happened to him, it could happen to someone else who didn't have the platform to fight back. This wasn't about a chair in the sky. It was about respect, fairness, and the courage to stand firm when it's easier to stay silent. The truth is, life will hand you moments where shrinking feels safe, but standing tall is necessary, where giving in keeps the peace, but drawing a line changes the game. David's decision to say not today grounded more than just a plane. It grounded an entire room of people in the reality that respect must be given where it's due, and that's the takeaway. Sometimes the fight isn't about what's in front of you, it's about everything that came before it and everything that will come after. So the next time you're faced with a situation where you know you're in the right, ask yourself, will you shrink to make others comfortable, or will you stand calmly but firmly for what's yours? If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Respect shouldn't be optional, and silence shouldn't be the price of peace.